Hi everyone, just wanted to give you some more farm pointers. Anything I can do to help. I can't help about these carpenter bees, but I sure can add certain things that I've learned about some of these old tractors and things on the farm that you're always wrestling with. So I'm going to start off showing you basically a little bit some tips on changing the fuel filter on these tractors in general. Now this is a Kubota L305 DT, and if you call the dealers, they don't even recognize those names, and just because they're old. But you know, the reason why you don't see many of these for sale if they're working is because no one wants to sell them. They're just workhorses with their little sniffles and things you got to deal with, like just challenges on all sorts of different bases. So anyway, I'm going to dive in here a little bit and talk about fuel filter changes and some of the challenges that you have. Anyway, so this here's the fuel filter right here, and you usually need some kind of a standard filter wrench to get it off, and the same rules apply. Hand tighten back on. And there's the oil filter as well. These are not hard to find, okay? You can find them on Amazon. You know, Kubota has them. So they're not difficult. Now, what is interesting, is hard to find, it's actually oil filters for these old tractors. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges here. I'm going around the other side of the tractor here to show you how the first thing you got to do when you change the oil filter is obviously turn off the fuel flow. And every tractor is different, but in this particular case, you can see that this right here is the actual fuel valve, shutoff valve, and so to the left is open, and all the way to the right, you just screw it all the way to the right, and that will shut the valve. So right is off, left is on. So shut that off, come back and to your filter, and put a pan underneath it. You might even want to get a rag, put a pan underneath the filter, lift it up, and just take it off, okay? So it's easy enough. Now on Kubota 4x4s, or little scooter things you get around the farm on, changing a diesel oil filter is not a big deal, because you know, you remove it from the bottom, and they've got these fuel shut-off valves that make it so that you don't get air in the line. In this particular case, you're almost always going to have to get air in the line, thus you're going to have to bleed these things. And that can be a real pain in the butt, okay? Because if anybody's ever run out of fuel on a diesel tractor and you try to start it, you better have a battery charger nearby cranking it when you put more gas in. Okay, so I'm going to point out a few things that you have to do if you can't get it started after you've changed the fuel filter, and I will tell you that you most likely will have a challenge. Okay, so you got it on here. Thing you're supposed to do, some people, it's debatable, say that you don't need to, but most people who do this quite often say that you need to take this fuel filter when it's off, fill it to the top with diesel fuel, and then gently screw it back in to the deal. Hand tighten. So you get in there, you start the thing, you're thinking, wow, this thing's running. You're about ready to do a high five with somebody, and all of a sudden it dies. It's because it realizes there is air in the system. So how do you rectify this thing? First of all, you got to go back, and you got to turn that fuel valve back on so you got fuel going into the filter. Pretty easy to identify that. First thing you got to do is you got to bleed the fuel filter. Now, to do that is a mystery for a lot of people, but it's a relatively easy thing to do. You come in here in this particular model, and here is the actual bleed bolt, the bleed screw, or whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of in a difficult spot to get a wrench around, but you can easily do it. And you loosen this just a little bit. You don't take it off. You just loosen it up so that when you get back in and you spin it, as the people who speak the lingo in here, spin it. Basically crank it, but you spin it. And until you start noticing fluid flowing out of here in a standard form with no bubbles. Once you see that you got clear fluid coming in, dripping into your pan down below, then you tighten this. And you think, okay, maybe that is all you need to do. Hopefully it is. And if you haven't tried to change the thing and put any air into the injectors, you might be lucky. Now, here's the deal. If you can't get it started after this point, after spinning it over and over and over, you got to come in here, and these are the injectors. And this item down here at the bottom is basically the fuel pump. And these 3 connection points are rigid. And if you unscrew each one of these things and unscrew each one of these, you can lift this whole mechanism right off these injectors. 1 injector, 2 injectors, 3 injectors. And but you really shouldn't have to remove this whole thing, but you might have to bleed the injector. So how do you do that? Well, come into this injector point right here, each one, and you'll notice down below you've got a wrench, you got a bolt type thing right here, and then you've got this top bolt right here. So the way you've got to do, what you got to do with each one of these things is you got to place a wrench down on the bottom wrench to keep the injector in place. You don't want to loosen the injector because they've got seals and rings and all that kind of stuff. And if you get and if it's not seated right, then you'll have a host of problems. It won't be running right and all this kind of thing. So you got to hold the base of that thing while you twist this bolt to the right, and right loosens this thing up to the point where you can bleed it. You go to the next one, you do the same thing. You hold the base of that thing, and then you loosen this top one until it's loose, and you do the next one. Now then what you got to do is you got to hook your battery up, because you just burn your battery out trying to get this thing started, because you got to spin this engine as much as you can until you see fluid actually bleeding out of each one of these points. And you want to see it, again, no bubbles, clear, and you tighten them down, boom, and then you're hopefully ready to go. But you think like, okay, it's ready to go. You get in there and you spin it and nothing happens. Or you spin it while these things are loose. You're expecting to see fluid coming out because you're bleeding it, but you don't see any fuel coming out while you're spinning the engine. What you got to do is you got to keep spinning it. You got to keep cranking it carefully. You might be afraid you're going to burn the starter out, but you got to just basically keep diligent and spinning this thing until you see fluid coming out. And if you hit, so that's really what you have to do at that point. And then you tighten these things down, and then hopefully you're good to go. But it is a process, and it's just a process of continuing to spin and pump fuel, into these injectors. There are situations where if you can't be successful here, you take this whole mechanism off. And then you start spinning it until you start seeing fuel spitting up out of this, like it'll go like little spits that go up into these, out of this fuel pump here, into the air, and you realize, okay, we got some action going here with fuel. And then you tighten, you bleed these down. And then you come down and you bleed these down. So it's a pain. You know, this is one thing that you know, if you're good, you should do frequently. But boy, if you do it frequently, you know, be prepared for some frustration. Now, one of the things you got to look out for when you're doing this thing, just to let you know, and this was in my case, I had this problem. You see these little hoses that go from injector to injector to injector, these little things. These sit overheat and they can split. And if you have any kind of a slice or slit or hole in these little hoses, then you get air into the system, and the engine can run poorly or can not run at all. Period. So just look at all your connection points, making sure that you don't have any cracks in your fuel lines. This is, I believe, a 1/8 inch fuel line that you can get at some places like Napa and things like that. It doesn't have to be rigid. It's got to be a fuel line. It can be a clear. It can be black hose, whatever. And then you can get these little clips are very hard to find. And in this particular case, these hoses, the one on the right, fit on there so tight that I didn't feel the need to wrestle around with putting a clamp on there. Ideally, you should have clamps on all these things, but they're hard to find. And then when you get them, they're hard to, work over the inside, to tighten them down where they need to be. So anyway, that's my story. I hope this helps. Having these tractors is you got to get yourself down to the point where you expect to have problems. Good thing is I think that you learn some very, very good lessons in doing this thing, and that you can share with others, which is what I'm going to do. So anyway, I hope this helps, and I hope this helps a lot.